Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Beke, and today we're going to talk about the French Revolution. By the end of the 18th century, France was one of the most significant countries in Europe. It played an important role in European trading, had several industries, and developed road and canal systems. On the other hand, France had many problems. During the 18th century, it lost most of its colonies overseas, and the followers of Louis XIV still had absolute power over France and ruled without parliament, which in France was called the Estates General. The cost of the monarchy, because of several reasons, for example, the luxury of the royal court and many wars, was pretty huge, and the taxes were pretty high. And because of the feudal orders, it was very difficult to develop industry and agriculture further. People were very unhappy and dissatisfied, and during the years of 1787 and 1788, many bad years came in the French agriculture, which caused widespread famine during France. This is going to be one of the most important problems of the French Revolution. As of course the French rulers wanted to keep their positions in Europe, they had to fight with other countries, and because of that the royal treasury was empty. The king at this time, Louis XVI, needed money for several reasons, for example, solving the financial crisis of France, but to raise or levy taxes, you needed the meeting of the Estates General. And so in 1789, he called for a meeting of the Estates General. The meeting took place at Versailles with the representatives of the estates. In the Estates General, there were three estates. The first estate, the clergy, which had 300 representatives and one vote. The second estate, which was the nobility, which had 300 representatives and one vote. And the third estate, which had 600 representatives and also one vote. So 600 representatives could outvote the third 2-1. It doesn't seem fair, right? Well, it wasn't fair, because if you look at it, the third estate represented about 98% of the French population, while the two other, the first and the second estate, only represented 2% of the French population, which is absolutely, of course, according to our perception, is pretty much unfair. During the meetings of the Estates General, the king wanted money, but the first and the second estates wanted to keep their privileges. On the other hand, the third estate wanted changes, reforms. So the members of the estate listed their demands, mostly equal rights and fair taxation. They also wanted to alter the Estates General to a national assembly. They said this, or this was their opinion about the whole thing. They justified that as they represented the 98% of the nation, of the French nation and the French population. However, Louis XVI refused the demands of the third estate. He actually ended the meeting, and as a result the members of the third estate went to another building, Versailles, which was the royal tennis court, and continued their meeting there. They declared themselves the National Assembly. as they represent most of the French population, and decided to stay until the king granted their demands and they set up a constitution for France. This event was called the Tennis Court Oath. The king ordered his army to dissolve the National Assembly, but that was a failure, mostly because in many cases the soldiers joined the side of the revolutionaries. So while Louis XVI was planning to defeat the Third Estate, the people in Paris attacked and completely destroyed the Bastille, the hated symbol of absolute royal power, on the 14th of July 1789. The destruction of the Bastille was only the starting point of the revolution. Soon after the events in Paris, peasants also turned against their lords. They refused feudal duties and burned castles. The terrified nobles ran away and many of them left France. At the same time, the National Assembly voted to end feudalism. They abolished feudal privileges and duties. In August 1789, the National Assembly accepted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This document contained the main principles of the revolution. It declared that people were free and equal in rights. It stated that all political power came from the people as well. The offices and positions should be filled according to talent, not social rank. Finally, this introduced the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion. This declaration also included the natural rights of man, which were 4: liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Note that somehow it's kinda can be connected to the United States Constitution. Well, although Louis XVI had to accept this declaration, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, he still wanted to take back his power. First he set up an army, and then he tried to escape, but he was caught at Varennes and was brought back to Paris. Here, he now was forced to sign the new constitution, which contained all the demands of the Third Estate, at this time the National Assembly. With this constitution, France became a constitutional monarchy in 1791. Louis XVI was still the King of France, but he could introduce laws only together with the National Assembly, and the newly created government was also controlled by this National Assembly. On the other hand, some European countries did not agree with the revolution, and to support Louis XVI, the Prussian and Austrian rulers introduced a declaration, the Declaration of Pillnitz in 1791. According to this, if Louis XVI or any member of the French royal family would be harmed during the revolution, the Prussian and the Austrian ruler would declare war on France. The French king hoped that the war, which happened from 1792, because as a response to this Pillnitz declaration, France declared war on Prussia and Austria, and not the other way. The king hoped that this war would actually end the revolution and he could regain his old power, his absolute power. So he still was in contact with Prussia and Austria. However, the French unexpectedly won a battle near Valmy, so the Prussian and Austrian troops had to leave France. And after this victory, not very long after this victory, about 2 days, France became a republic, and Louis XVI wasn't a king anymore. He was renamed citizen Louis Capet and was sent to prison as a traitor, and 1 year later, in January 1793, he was executed. When France became a republic, the National Assembly was called the National Convention. The government still had the power to govern the country, but its members did not always agree. The citizens were satisfied with the results and they planned to stop fighting. On the other hand, a group of more radical people wanted to continue the revolution. They were called the Jacobins, and their leader was Robespierre. The Jacobins were supported by the poorest people in Paris. When France was again attacked by Austria, Prussia, England, Spain, and Holland, the French Republic was faced with difficulties. It had to defeat the enemies and handle the problems caused by the war. There was not enough food, especially in Paris, where most of the people were starving. The National Assembly could not solve these problems, so the Jacobins took power in 1793, establishing a new government, the Committee of Public Safety. To handle the difficulties, the Jacobins introduced a dictatorship. On the one hand, they controlled the prices and tried to make the people's lives better. On the other hand, they used terror to frighten the enemies of the revolution. Thousands of people were killed during their rule. At the same time, the Jacobins had to fight against foreign enemies as well. They ordered all men in France to join the army, and they set up several new troops. These were led by talented young generals who used successful strategies in battles. One of the new generals was a 24-year-old from Corsica called Napoleon Bonaparte. Despite the military victories, more and more people turned against the Jacobins. Everybody was afraid of them. Even the leaders of the Jacobins had conflicts. Danton, one of the leaders, was executed because he did not agree with Robespierre. People who did not support the Jacobins took advantage of this conflict and turned against them. Robespierre was arrested and executed in 1794. The dictatorship ended and the most powerful citizens regained power. They set up a new system called the Directory to govern France. However, during the 5 years of the Directory, they had to face many problems. For example, there were Jacobin riots or royalist riots within France, and outside of the country the war was still on against many countries. So as the influence of the Directory decreased, so did the role of the army increase, because they put out the riots and fought the enemies of the revolution, and it was just a matter of time that one of the generals will take over France. And this happened in 1799, when Napoleon Bonaparte, with the help of the army, actually overthrew the Directory, and in 1799 he established a new government in France, which was called the Consulate.